Our next speaker is the CEO of OVO, one of the largest energy retailers in the UK. And now he's going to explore how OVO is decarbonising its 4 million customers' homes and how achieving this has parallels to the growth of the internet. Please welcome Raman Bhatia.
Good afternoon, all. It's a pleasure to be here. And I want to start by speaking about a topic we love chatting about in our great island nation, and I am, of course, speaking about weather. So if you don't mind casting your memory back to last summer, and imagine a windy day in Scotland, and that shouldn't be very hard to imagine. But I have a particularly blustery day in mind. This is the 8th of June, 2022. Late summer evening, winds have picked up, and in fact, they are gushing now at 25 miles an hour. It's perfect weather for those wind turbines to start spinning and produce green electrons. But curiously, none of the wind turbines seem to be spinning. In fact, they've just received a message saying, "Can you please shut down?" And at the same time, gas-powered stations in England have received a message to ramp up. What's going on? This is a phenomenon called wind curtailment. It is a very clinical euphemism for wasting lots and lots of green energy. Now, what if I tell you this happened more than 200 times last year? And now this stat will drive you nuts. We paid £200 million for these wind turbines to shut down. The same time, the same period, we spent £600 million on fossil fuel stations to ramp up. So that's 800 million spent in what was a harrowing energy crisis last year. And the amount of energy we wasted could have powered 1 million homes with green electricity. Now, all of this comes down to our well-known supply issues. We don't have enough cables taking power from Scotland, where most of generation happens, to England, where most of consumption happens. We've got grid issues, we've got supply-side challenges which need to be addressed urgently. But there is one more side to this equation, and that's what I want to talk about today. This is where all of you in this room, every one of us becomes part of a decentralized energy system. A system in the future that is consumer-led, tech-empowered, and AI-enabled. But let's take a step back and do a whistle-stop tour of our energy transition. The scope and velocity is actually pretty impressive. Let's go back to 1990. We don't need to go to the advent of hydrocarbons. 1990 is a notable year for us, because that's where we made our commitments to net zero. All our baselines come from 1990. And in 1990, we were largely a system of burning coal, taking the power from coal fields into our homes. More than 2/3 of our electricity came from burning coal. And the grid was very simple. It was fossil fuel-powered stations and a command and control orchestration run by the grid, which meant you could meet very predictable periods of demand by ramping up production of energy through these coal-powered plants. Fast forward to today, last year, and our fuel mix has transformed quite radically. yes, it's 30 years, but in the 300 years of hydrocarbons, this is quite a shift. Only 2% of our energy came from coal in 2022. Now, credit where credit is due. This has come on the back of ambitious public policy. Yes, that exists, and that has happened in the past, which has then catalyzed private sector investment in renewables. In particular, offshore wind in the UK has been a great success story, and we have transformed our grid on the back of offshore wind. Fuel mix, as a result, is much cleaner, and more crucially, this has meant we have halved our carbon emissions over this period. And a large part of this comes from energy. So what needs to happen next? Despite the watering down that has happened recently around our net zero commitments, there is one target where we have unwavering commitment, and that is to make our electricity grid net zero by 2035. So 12 years. Not a long way to go, and this would need very ambitious policy. We need to fix our auction mechanism, which didn't work last time, but all indications that's back on track. But we also need to address all the grid blockages which prevent incredibly cheap green electrons to flow freely across the system. But let's come back to that, the fun part I promised. And that is the part where we all come in. And we have a key role to play here. So what do we need to do? So first and foremost, we need to use energy efficiently and smartly. More than half of you have smart meters in your homes, but unfortunately only less than 8% of us have smart thermostats in our homes. When you combine the use of smart meters and all the notification nudges you get in energy apps, for example, in the OVO app through Energy Insights, you can compare your energy consumption and take useful tips around managing energy better. With smart thermostats, when used well, you can reduce your heat consumption by up to 15%. But there's actually a lot more we can do. We have a proposition called Power Move, whereby 100,000 OVO customers will be shifting their energy usage from what's called the 4 p.m. to 7 p.m. rush on the grid. This is when the grid is working really hard. It's also the dirtiest. It's really run by fossil fuels, and it's also the most expensive. 20% of our usage, that applies to all of us, happens in that peak period. So with Power Move, OVO customers are taking part in pricing signals, notifications, which help them shift their usage from outside of that 4 to 7 p.m. peak. And they can reduce consumption, reduce their bills, and more crucially, reduce the carbon emissions that are concentrated in that period. They also help in leveling off the peak of the grid. But there's a lot more we can already do. And this is where, with smart technology and automation, you can really sync demand and supply. So for instance, we have a proposition called OVO Anytime, where for EV customers, electric vehicle owners, who have smart chargers in their homes, they can schedule charging, spell out when the car needs to be fully charged, and then automation kicks in and helps optimize the charging in a fashion when the grid is the cleanest and actually the cost is also the lowest. But let's talk about the really exciting part. This is where we can actually experience a paradigm shift. This is when consumers can become suppliers and our homes become part of this virtual power plant network, multiple microgrids connected together. And this will happen when we start electrifying everything. And this is, by the way, happening already. When we are replacing our petrol, diesel cars with EVs, we are heating our homes with electric heat, for instance, by heat pumps. And then imagine millions of rooftop solar and battery systems at the point of consumption. Now, all of this coming together with smart hardware, automation, and AI means that the grid becomes truly multi-directional. This is where we are heating our homes before the 4 p.m. peak, and the heat pump actually heats maybe ever so slightly higher than what you need, and you won't notice it, and it discharges when the peak comes. This is when the wind is blowing, your battery system is consuming that green electricity. Your EV charger is working overnight and consuming energy. And then with the use of software, the next day, you dispatch this energy back to the grid, all through automation. Now, imagine grid forming software sitting on top of that, which not only optimizes all these flows, exchanges, but also synchronizes your home energy system with the wider frequencies of the grid. And in this model, which is feasible now, you can power your home on your own. You can sell electricity back to the grid. And by the way, and this is very compelling in this harrowing cost of living crisis, you could even, instead of exporting or selling it back to the grid, what if you could actually donate that energy to another microgrid, which is powering a set of flats not too far from you? That is an incredible future which is upon us. Now, there's a board outside which is much more interactive. I'll encourage you to go there and play around with various scenarios which will help you balance the grid using all these hardwares in your homes and then automation sitting on top of that. But it's important to note that this is not futuristic. This technology exists now. I mean, heat pumps are air conditioners in reverse and have been around for a long time, notwithstanding all the myths you might read in certain sections of the media. The solar power panels are there on rooftops already. In fact, close to 1 million homes in the UK already have them. EVs, 25% of cars sold are EVs, and the growth is unstoppable. In 2018, we actually conducted what's still the largest trial of vehicle-to-grid. This is the energy that's in the battery of the car and selling it back to the grid, optimizing demand and supply. More than 300 cars took part, owners took part, and saved more than £800 a year on this system. So all of this is absolutely feasible now. This needs very decisive policy around interoperability, resilience of the grid. Of course, we need to address all the supply challenges. But once we have done that, this microsystem plays a key role in our net zero ambitions in the future. In fact, by 2050, there'll be estimated 40 million EVs in the UK, and more than half of those EVs will be contributing back to the grid. Over the same period, more than half of UK homes will be helping balance the grid and actually supplying more than 63 gigawatts of flexibility, more than half of the flexibility needed in the grid. And if we don't do this, the cost of upgrade is billions and billions of pounds on top of what we need to do anyway. It'll be multiple billions between now and 2035, 2050. So this is a generational opportunity for us to get right. And in many ways, I see it very similar to what's happened in the internet. Web 1.0, 2.0, and then yet to be realized, despite the hype, Web 3.0. And this is very similar in the sense that we are moving from a very central command and control orchestration to a world where all of us are active participants of this energy grid and also potential owners of this grid. And if we get all of this right, go back to that windy day in Scotland, and it is not a day of curtailment. Instead, it is a day of turbocharging this federated electric grid, which is now connected by millions of distributed energy resources, all of them, imagine, humming to the tune of these green electrons flowing through our grid. Thank you.